Can you hear me? Is this good?
We're good.
Alright, so pretty much today I played the Dragon Stompy variant, which is Dragon Stompy are traditionally just Blood Moon effects and lock pieces. They are Chalice aggro decks, so they rely heavily on Chalice of the Void. Chalice set against on 1 is very strong against the majority of the format, so that will traditionally be, when you look at your opening 7 with this deck, right, you are looking for one of these cards in particular. You're looking for either a Blood Moon effect that you can play turn 1, because your mana base of City of Traders, Ancient Tomb, and your accelerants such as Spirit Guide and Chrome Mox will allow you to play a 3-drop on turn 1 fairly consistently. And Blood Moon is very strong now with people playing a lot of Bug Control, a lot of Jund, a lot of like Stoneblade decks. They do not have many basics. And a lot of times if this will hit turn 1, you will win the game automatically. Trinisphere effects are less so, but a lot of people, especially if they keep hands where they're like a 1-lander with a Deathrite, which is traditionally fine, is not in this case. So Trinisphere also has the chance of just locking your opponent out of the game from the get-go. It's also very good against the various combo decks that people like to play, such as the Epic Storm, Ad Nauseam, those kind of decks that want to play multiple spells in a turn, and Charbelcher for those people who like to play that. We'll get to that in a moment. Death and Taxes likes to kill this deck a lot. They are very good against this deck. So yes, the basis of the deck are the 4 Chalice of the Voids, the 4 Trinispheres, the 4 Blood Moons, and the 4 Magus of the Moons. You have the acceleration, the mana base. I personally prefer to play a 4th Crystal Vein over a 4th City of Traders, because in a pinch, this can act as a City of Traders. You just blow it for 2 mana and a Spirit Guide for your turn 1 threat. Or, in the case where you have your 4 drops or against some of the decks where you want to grind a little more, it can just act as a land. And that is very important that you can be able to play one of these early and not have it break. The threats that people like to play in these decks have traditionally been, the old version was a very Hellbent oriented deck. They like to play Gathan Raiders, which is a cheap 5/5 most of the time. They like to play Rakdos Pit Dragon, also another Hellbent all-star. And those decks traditionally played a lot of Seething Songs and other acceleration effects so that they could drop their hand. I personally want to move away from that to more of the controlling version. And this is by no means my deck. I have found this deck on the internet and I fell in love with it, so I am trying to build it and play it. So I do not wish to take any credit for it. But we have moved away from that, and I personally enjoy Hound of Grizzlebrand. Some people have played it and they do not like it, so they moved away from it. But I feel, at least in my store, I don't know about your local communities or if you want to go to a big event, if you find Liliana is a very prevalent card in your meta, you wish to play this card. Those decks traditionally cannot beat this card. Normally, old Dragon Stompy, you would play Big Threat, they would play Liliana, you would pack your cards up because they'd kill your threat and then drown you in card advantage. This guy does not actually die with his Undying trigger, for those people who don't know this card. He is very strange.
Hold up to this
One? Sure. He's just a 2/2 double striker with Undying. He also serves as kind of a benefit that he can trade with a Germ token off of Battle Skull, which is traditionally strong against this deck, and survive and still apply pressure to your opponent. This is very important. One of the weirder cards you will see in this deck, I feel that people really should pay more attention to, is this guy called Mogcatcher. Did they ever make an actual cycle of Elvish Poacher, or is it just the 2?
It's just the 2.
It's just the 2? So this is probably his less known brother. This guy, for 3 tap, for his 4-drop, finds any Goblin in your deck and puts him directly into play. Now, Siege Gang Commander is pretty good in this deck. You can cast him most of the time, but if you ever have one of these active, you just find a Siege Gang every turn until your opponent realizes that they cannot beat your swarm of Goblins. I only have 2 because I cannot find any more in my local area within the 2 days prior to this event that I wanted to play this deck. I would highly recommend playing the full 4. I personally am also missing 2 Rakamars because I cannot find any. I have not actually seen it, but in all the playtest games we had, when I had proxied up Rakamars and Mogcatchers, I found this card extremely strong. It is very good against some of the grindy matchups. It's very good against the Batterskull decks. It is excellent against Liliana. It will kill a Liliana half the time, or at the very least it'll survive through a Liliana by just making a token and then dropping her to 1. And even if they have a spot removal spell for your Rakamar, you will still get an elemental out of it that is quite permanent. And that is very important. This Jaya Ballard and these Revokers are more traditional sideboard cards, but as I spoke on, I would play more of these than these. A lot of other players agree that, or not necessarily agree, because I don't, so that's not the word we were looking for here, but they believe that you should be playing 2 to 4 Revokers in the main deck. Almost all of the lists are playing 3 nowadays. This is very strong against the old like Grizzlebrand decks. It's very good. It's very good against one of the nightmare matchups of this deck called Death and Taxes, because Mangara looping is just too powerful for you. None of your lock pieces work against them, like for Death and Taxes, because they play a bunch of basics and efficient threats. The other threat that I feel I should be playing more of is Koth of the Hammer. Now, a lot of people I feel don't actually have a lot of respect for this card, but against control decks, if they do not counter him, he will win the game instantly. Against aggro decks, he forces them into combat with you. They can no longer sit back and kind of hope to make a standstill effect where they are looking for their bigger threat to enter yours, and if you ever swing, they can make a bunch of blocks in combat. This guy forces the clock on them. If they don't answer him instantly, they will just die to his emblem because you play a million mountains and can ping everything. The Jit, I think every deck pretty much in Legacy, if you have creatures, you should play 1 Jit in your main. That is that. We have more cards in the sideboard, I suppose, that are arguably not the best, but I have found them to be very useful today. So I'm playing 2 Cavernous Souls in my sideboard, which help put through, you will generally name Human, which will let you push through your Maguses, your Jaya, and your Maw Catchers, as well as your Rakamars. Like, it pays for all of these. They are all humans. They are all very powerful threats against the control decks. Magus in particular, because they traditionally don't have a way to answer it once it's on the field, and they're just hoping to counter it before it hits the field. We have a Kiki-Jiki, which is paired with this Tuk-Tuk Scrapper, which is part of the Maw Catcher package. So the Kiki-Jiki allows you to just start looping your Siege Gang commanders against the matchups that might be able to grind well against you. You know, the Batterskull decks and whatnot. Or, if they are just on a Batterskull and not like a Jit in a Batterskull, you can just find this Tuk-Tuk Scrapper, which is a handy little goblin from Worldwake, right?
Can I ask why my foil signed Kiki-Jiki is not a sleeve?
I do not have a good answer. I will find one.
Okay. Moving along with the rest of the sideboard. Okay.
So the Tuk-Tuk Scrapper, when he enters the battlefield, he will destroy an artifact. He shatters, and then he'll deal 1 damage because he deals damage equal to allies, which he is the only one in the deck. He synergizes very well with Kiki-Jiki against the affinity decks and any other deck that relies heavily on artifacts. If you ever see like Shot in the Dark or something of that nature. We have 2 more Revokers in the sideboard, a general catch-all against anything running Planeswalkers, equipment, whatever you have. We have 2 Pyrokinesis to deal with any of the Swarm decks, such as Elves, Death and Taxes, other creature decks. They're very good. You have another Jaya Ballard for the blue matchup. We have 3 Confusion in the ranks, which is an enchantment that, while it is on the battlefield, every time an artifact, creature, or enchantment were to enter the battlefield, you will randomly swap it with one of your opponents. Actually, it might not even be random. You do not, you choose actually. So you will choose one of their permanents that shares a type and swap them. I personally have this in the board to fight show and tell decks. If they show and tell and they put in an Omniscience or a Sneak Attack and they don't have the extra red right then, it'll just instantly swap and I will have an Omniscience or Sneak Attack. If they put in a creature, I will then just put in a creature next turn and have an Emrakul. It's very handy. And we also have these 3 Anarchies in the sideboard, which is a very old card that for 4 mana says destroy all white permanents. Back to how bad the Death and Taxes matchup is, to be able to swipe their board through Mother of Runes, Thalias, all of that, it is great. It's the catch-all. Also one of the lesser known decks, or lesser played decks that, ironically enough, I played today. It is very good against Enchantress, because you get to blow away their humilities and moats off the field and kill them the turn they weren't expecting it. This actually came up today, it was very funny. But yeah, for the most part, this is the deck. And the only changes I said I would make, I would probably try to find room for the Revokers back in the sideboard and just find more Maw Catchers and Rakamars to play.